Patrick, alcoholic, living in Denver, Colorado. So hello from the Rocky Mountains. Uh, I'd like to take a minute and just pause for a moment of silence for a good friend of mine, my very first friend in recovery that I met at my very first meeting that passed away this week with 35 years of sobriety. His name was Flo Lawrence, and he was a hell of a guy. So I'm just going to take a minute. And I didn't mean a full minute, but thanks so much, Flo, for all that you've done. Patrick, alcoholic, Denver, Colorado. Welcome, everybody. And I always like to preface anything I say with the fact that I'm no expert on anything. I'm no authority on the 12 steps. I've been sober. My sobriety date is March 2nd of 1987. I got sober in Los Angeles, California back in 87. And I've been sober ever since. Haven't had a drink or a drug since. And it's all due to the power and the healing transformative powers of the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous and the action that I took along with those. And, I'm going to speak, but I'd like to start off with something. I'm supposed to speak on step 7, and that's what I'm going to speak on. So I would like to read step 7 out of the 12 and 12 so we can be sure that some part of Alcoholics Anonymous is actually shared with us here while I'm talking. And it says, step 7, humbly ask him to remove our shortcomings. Since this step so specifically concerns itself with humility, we should pause here to consider what humility is and what the practice of it can mean to us. Indeed, the attainment of greater humility is the foundation principle of each of AA's 12 steps. For without some degree of humility, no alcoholic can stay sober at all. Nearly all AAs have found, too, that unless they develop much more of this precious quality than may be required just for sobriety, they still haven't much chance of becoming truly happy. Without it, they cannot live to much useful purpose or, in adversity, be able to summon the faith that can meet any emergency. Humility as a word is off and an ideal has a very bad time of it in our world. And whenever we speak of different things, I always like to keep it in the context of how they wrote it, not Patrick's context of humility, but the context that they wrote this book and what they were referring to. And they give the definition of their context that they spoke of on page 58 in the 1212. It's part of step 5. And it says, another great dividend we can expect from confiding our defects to another human being is humility, a word often misunderstood. To those who have made progress in AA, it amounts to a clear recognition of who and what we really are, followed by a sincere attempt to become what we could be. And that's the way it was explained to me, and that's the way I understand it, and that's the way I explain it to people when I work with people. And I don't use my definition, I use that definition. And that definition to me means that who and what I really am is I'm one of God's kids, and I get to be one of God's kids. And then who and what I really am, followed by a sincere attempt to become that. So I put my actions into becoming that. So if you're new, welcome. And if you have a problem with God, welcome. Because when I came here, I also had a problem with God. And they said that didn't matter, and if you are having trouble turning your will in your life, doing the third step over to a God as you understand him, you're in luck, because the way it was explained to me is, we get to, in our literature, it says that if you can't turn it over to the God as you understand him, then the third step offers us and invites us to turn our will in our life over the care of God as we understand him, as Alcoholics Anonymous understands him. And in our literature on page 46 in We Agnostics, it says, that power which is God, which none of us can fully comprehend or define. So therefore, this alcoholic, this person, does not have to try and define or comprehend that which is infinite. Because today, my life, even after 33 years of sober, I still believe God is infinite and is beyond my definition, because I'm a finite person. And if God has a story and a face and that kind of stuff, then he's limited to that story and my definition of him. And I get to believe today, like it says in our big book, we must allow for limitless expansion. And one of the great things about that I never saw coming was, maybe if God doesn't have to be defined, maybe I don't have to be defined, and that has been a process. And it's hard to talk about just one step for me, because I believe that the 12 steps are like a transmission, and I was taught, first three steps are admit, come to, make a decision. I have a problem in my life or a challenge in my life. I get to admit, come to, make a decision. I admit that I'm powerless and my life is unmanageable, which generally means me managing the situation is probably why it's a problem. And that has been my running record and what I've determined over many inventories. And step two gives us an invitation. It's not telling us who God is or anything like that. It gives us permission and invites us to decide for ourselves. There's either a power that we can rely on and that can help us, or there isn't. What's my choice to be? I mean, it's almost insulting, as I say, it's the way it's written in our literature, but I love it. It says, don't let your prejudices prevent you from asking you what these things mean to you. So you're not even asking anybody else. So it's like, don't let your preconceived notions, what you've learned before, prevent you from asking yourself, well, what does it mean to be spiritual? What does it mean to have a God in your life? What is God to you? And that's the amazing part about the process of the 12 steps. And then in the third step, we get to make a decision whether or not we get to turn our will and our life over to that, or the problem or the challenge that we're facing at the time. And so admit, come to, make a decision. And then, like we always tell the story about the 5 frogs sitting on the log, 2 decide to jump off. How many are left? And of course it's 5, because they only decided to jump off. Well, me as an addict and alcoholic, I want to feel the leap. I want to feel the immersion into the splash into the water. I want to feel that rush over me. Where do I get to feel that in the process of the 12 steps? It's in 4 and 5, doing the inventory. I know I've done a third step because I'm writing a 4th step, and it says this third step is a vital, life-giving, and crucial step, but it'll have little or no lasting effect unless followed at once, immediately, by a rigorous house cleaning, an effort to face and be rid of, and that's an inventory. So then I do a quick inventory, and I immediately share it with someone, hopefully a close mouth friend, a sponsor, and then we get into 6 and 7, whatever the problem is. And this is where they talk about 6 and 7 being the really powerful steps, and for me, they really are. I've learned that to be true. And just in general, 6 is we quit telling God how powerful our problems are, and in 7, we start telling our problems how powerful our God is. And it's the God that we say is powerful, the God that we decide. And there's just so many examples of that. I got sober, like I said, I'm originally from Northeastern Pennsylvania. I grew up drinking, using drugs, all that stuff. I wound up going out to California to help a family member go through a trial, and wound up crashing and burning in Los Angeles, and going and discovering Alcoholics Anonymous there. And it was there in those rooms that these people taught me the things that I learned today and get to pass on to them. And one of the amazing things that I was taught was that every day, every single day, I get a blank canvas, and I get to paint on whatever I want onto that canvas. And the process of the 12 steps gives me a choice in the tools and the colors that I use to paint onto that canvas. Because see, when I arrived at Alcoholics Anonymous, I came from a long line of alcoholism, a bunch of violence. I'm not going to go into my story too much. It's so boring, but a lot of violence, a lot of insanity, a lot of drinking, a lot of, all that all-American stuff that we talk about in meetings. And so when I woke up every day, the only colors I had to paint with were anger, resentment, guilt, shame, all that stuff. And today, having worked the steps and taken the actions involved with the steps, I today have something else to select from on the shelves in my life. I always imagine there's like these shelves that I get to select from, but and it feels that way today. And today, I get to use the principles to paint and color with today, and it's so different. And just like the principles today, like gratitude and forgiveness, which I like to share about a lot, and humility, which is step 7. And it's supposedly the underlying powerful principle under all our steps. Gratitude, I spent my life thinking I was lacking, and there was a scarcity of everything, and I had to go out there and try and get everything from you and ask you for stuff or acquire and achieve and all that other stuff. And it seemed like the world was unfriendly, and there was just never enough. And I looked through the lens and listened through the filter of not enough, and I made life decisions based on there not being enough. With the power of the principle of gratitude, I get to decide and act and think from being grateful for what I have. And when I'm grateful for what I have is enough. And then I get to go out through my life and start my day, start painting on that brand new canvas that I have enough. And then of course forgiveness, forgive everybody and everything I think ever harmed me, frees me up. And then the tough one, like step 7 is like with my drinking and my alcoholism, right? I was able to, through God's grace, to invite in a higher power between me and the drugs and alcohol. And that was the only way I was able to quit. I don't know of any other way. And as I stayed sober, I got to invite that same higher power in between me and women, my relationship with women, me and my relationship with money, my career, and all that other stuff. And as you stay sober, you get to go on this journey of self, and you get to at some point invite in your higher power in between you and your relationship with yourself. And that has been one of the most challenging things for me, and it's also the most freeing. And it comes from like I like to share, I always thought that when they say principles before personalities, I always thought that they meant principles between me and your personality, your selfishness, your anger, your whatever. And I find out that the principles I get to put in between me and my reactions, my anger, my resentment, all this other stuff. And that's actually where the freedom is, and 7 is so powerful in that. And, my creator, I'm willing that you should have followed me, the good and the bad. I'm going to screw up. There's a promise in the 10th step that said, it doesn't say if these things crop up. It says when these things crop up. And I get to backtrack, downshift into 7 and say, look what I've done, God. Can you take the good and the bad of me? And of course, I believe in a higher power today that is a loving, caring, kind higher power. And that's not the higher power that I arrived here with. I arrived here with the capricious, judgmental God, like so many of us arrived here with, And today my life is so different. And there's a saying that we used to say, you don't hear it much anymore, and it goes, I used to be different, but now I'm the same. And what it is I get to get back to the original idea of me, because the idea, like the basic psychology is, if I had not been beaten when I was a kid, I would be able to go and do and be free as Patrick had that not happened, right? And then, we were raised in welfare and all this other crap, right? So if we had money, so if something that wasn't there had been there, then I could go and do and be at peace as Patrick. Or if stuff today, like if the stuff that was going on today, like just say the news, the stuff that's in the news, if that wasn't going on, then Patrick could go and do and be at peace as Patrick. Or if the stuff that wasn't going on, things I think should be going on, were going on, then. So in other words, I'm always gathering evidence of why I just don't step out as myself. And the 12 steps gives me the process to do that and to take the chances, and like I said, invite that higher power in instead of serving the God of fear. It serve the God that I have today, which is loving and caring, and God is the resource, and, it still cracks me up to this day to hear myself talk about God, because I was so anti-God when I got here. And I used to vocalize it to people that would bring it up to me just to make sure that they would never, ever ask me about that subject again. And today it's really one of my favorite subjects, because at any time during the day, I get to stop and pause and ask myself and say, what is my resource today? Is my resource in the relationship I have? Is my resource in the money I have, the house I have, the job I have, any of that stuff? Or is it in the belief in a higher power? And there's a couple crazy things here where at, prayer, one of the things that the program offers us is to ask ourselves what these things mean to you. Because even though I hated the God I was raised with in organized religion, I found out after staying sober that I was still going by their definition of prayer and meditation and not really even thinking it through. And that's where we get to do with the process, the 12 steps, we get to take a look at prayer and meditation. What does it mean to me? What does it mean to me to pray? What does it mean to me to meditate? And then I get to go on that journey of discovery. And then if I find something, I get to come and share it with y'all. And, you guys listen or don't, but one of the things I learned is, there was a great woman that got sober in the 60s in Los Angeles. And she used to tell this great story about she had a problem with God like I did. And she used to pray, their sponsor says, you have to come up with a higher power. We don't care what it is, like it says in our literature, whatever it is, just to make a start, a willingness to believe. So she made this, a Beckons moving truck was driving by. So she goes, I'm going to believe in Beckons moving. That's my higher power. So anytime her sponsor would ask her about that stuff, she would say Beckons moving. And she found out as she stayed sober a while, she started looking for Beckons moving trucks as a sign, like we're all looking for a sign, right? So she would, and in Los Angeles, Beckons moving was very popular. I don't know if it still is, but you'd see them everywhere. So she'd see a Beckons moving truck and she'd go, oh, it's a sign. And she did it and did it and did it. And after a while, she discovered, and she gave me this gift when she shared it, it wasn't about the Beckons moving truck and whether or not she saw a Beckons moving truck. It was her willingness to seek outside of herself for a power other than herself. Like we used to say, if you can't find a power greater than yourself, my sponsor said, if you can't find a power greater than yourself, you egomaniac, then how about a power other than yourself, and how about the Los Angeles Police Department for one? And I said, okay. So it's really the practice of the stuff. It's in the seeking that we find that stuff, and we get to go on this journey, and we get, like the way I like to put it is, humility is, for me, and this is just my definition, is I did not give myself life. I did not give myself the skills or the aptitudes that I may or may not have, and therefore they're not mine to squander. They're not mine to judge, and they're not mine to hide and hoard and like I said, judge and self-loathe and all that stuff. And then I also did not decide to be here in this era of human existence. So some other power did. So if I go from that and realize that my life is not to be judged by me, like we say in the third step, the first part of doing a third step is we had to quit playing God. And the way I played God was I judged myself and I hated myself and the self-loathing and I'm odd, I'm strange, I'm all this other stuff. Can I turn that stuff over? Can I turn that stuff over to God? And how do I do that? Like the speaker was saying before, how do I access this power? There either is a power or there isn't. And how do I get to access that? And I have found, and I believe they discovered it in 1934 and 1935, and that is I give of myself. You see, I was always looking for this unlimited resource in drugs and alcohol and women and money and all this other stuff. And, there's just never enough. We all know that, right? And instant gratification isn't fast enough. We all know that, right? So where is the unlimited resource in my life? What do I have that I'll never run out of? And that is me. I can always give of myself. And when I first heard that, it sounded like, oh, I'm gonna have to move to Africa and be a Mother Teresa or something like that. And that's not the case at all. It's immediate and it's local. Where can I be of service today? And it doesn't always have to be just in a room of Alcoholics Anonymous and with drunks. Today, I carry the message and live from that stuff. And it comes back to my definition of prayer, which I got to go on a discovery and discover for myself. See, I never wanted to pray to God, but I did it as a demonstration of willingness. And in the beginning, saying a few set prayers, like it says in our literature, is a demonstration of willingness. But as I stay sober, I realize that my actions today are my real prayers, and I prayed to God long enough to discover how to pray from God, and if you have a problem with the word God, it's just a word that we're using to explain that thing that no one seems to know what to call it, spirit of the universe, creative force, whatever. It's the life behind all life, energy behind all energy is good enough for me. But for simplicity, we just all call it God, right? And when I'm speaking of God, I may not be referring to your version of God. My God, for me, when I was sitting in the 2+2 meeting on Tuesday night, in Westwood, California, when I was newly sober. June G was speaking up at the podium, and right behind her in the stained glass, it said, "God is love." And I just went, I'm going with that one. And it has been that for the longest time. And I've tested it out over years of staying sober. And the only thing that has changed since then is I've reversed it. I always said God is love. And now today I believe love is God, you know. And when I'm supposed to put my actions, my prayers, and pray from God. So if I'm praying from love and I act from love, it's amazing how different my life is. Instead of selfishness, self-centeredness, which is the root of all my troubles. And in 7, I get to humble all my plans and designs and all that other stuff and offer them up to a power greater than myself. And to, one of the things I had a newcomer ask me, a guy, a sponsor, and he came up to me, and I was talking to someone else, and he just came up and he goes, "How do you know when you turn your will and your life over, or you turn something over?" And without thinking, and I don't even know where this came from, without thinking, I turned to him, I said, "When it's met with thy will be done." And all of a sudden, it's one more time, like working with others. Why should I work with others? Because I was newly sober. I had nothing. My life was like this broken down vehicle laying on the side of the highway is the way I saw it. And yet they were saying, give of that. Like, what do I have to give? What did Bill and Bob have to give of when they had burned their lives to the ground and now they're 2 drunks that aren't drinking? What did they have to give? They were of service. They gave from the heart, and that's where the power was. And I get to give from that power today. And the more I do it, it's like, I don't know if you guys know the spiritual writer, Jean Houston. She talks about her father used to do comedy for Victor Bergen, and he did the ventriloquism with Charlie McCarthy, I believe it was. And one day, when she's like 8 years old, she got to go with her father to drop off his writings to Victor for the next show. And they got there a little early, and they were coming up, and they heard Victor talking. And they thought, oh, he's meeting with someone. But as they listened, they realized that he's talking to Charlie. So they thought, oh, he's practicing. And then they listened a little further, and they realized that Victor is asking Charlie, the mannequin, stuff like, what is the meaning of life? And what does it mean to truly be loved? And they were listening to this, and finally he realized that they were there, and they're like, oh, sorry, didn't mean to interrupt. He's like, no, it's fine. And then finally the guy couldn't help but ask. He goes, we heard you talking to Charlie while we're out there, but you're Charlie. You're the voice of Charlie. And Victor goes, yeah, it's the funny thing. He goes, I've learned that when I speak from Charlie, he goes, I realize stuff I didn't know. And Charlie says stuff that I didn't realize that I know. And the reason I tell that story is because I can't tell you how many times I've worked with a new guy and gone reluctantly, not even willingly, reluctantly gone, picked up this guy that I didn't know, drove him somewhere, got him coffee, cigarettes, took him to a meeting, that kind of stuff. And as I'm talking to him, I wind up saying things to him that I didn't even realize that I knew. So many times I would drive away going, man, I got to start practicing some of that stuff. I have no clue what's going on. I was at 26 and Broadway, which is in Santa Monica, and I was at a meeting, and I was with this buddy of mine. I'll leave his name out of it, but he has a scar from ear to ear where he got his throat almost cut. They tried to cut his throat in jail. And he seemed to think that I helped him get sober or something like this. And we're at the meeting, and there's this big, dangerous looking guy gets up at the podium. He goes, I don't know how these AA meetings work or whatever, but I just got out of prison, and now I find out my 21-year-old son is going to prison for murder, and I know what's waiting for him. I'm waiting for him. He goes, I'm the person that you want to be afraid of when you go to prison. And he goes, I know what awaits him, and they're gonna hurt him. And he goes, I don't know what to do about it. And he just gets down for the podium, walks. I didn't say he was an alcoholic, no, just gets down for the podium and walks off. And me and Andre get up and walk over to this guy, and we just start talking to him. And it was just one of those AA moments. I call them AA moments. It's a God moment, where God just sticks his hand up your butt and uses you as a Muppet, and you just start saying stuff that you have no idea what you're saying. I remember I'm standing there talking to this guy, and I couldn't even hear what I was saying, but I was talking. And next thing you know, this guy's giving me a hug and telling me, thank you so much, and all this. To this day, I still don't know what I said to the guy, but the guy says, because you did that, he goes, I'm going to come back and start going. And as far as I know, the guy is still sober, and I'm not going to say his name, but there's so many opportunities like that. And I can go on forever how many times working with someone humbling what was going on, because like I'm at home, I'm with my girlfriend, we're watching sports or something like that, and I get the 12-step call, right? And then I don't want to go, but it's like, no, I go anyway. And I can't tell you how many times I've gone on those trips to go pick up someone that I don't know. I don't know who this person is. I don't even know how they got my number, but I go and I wind up showing up, and I wind up driving away at the end of it, wondering, how is it that I got uplifted? How is it that my life is freer? How is it that that problem that I was worrying about all day long, I now have the answer for because I heard myself say it? And it's not like it's really to me, it's a God thing. It's like I get to tap into that intuitive power that is afforded us when we work a program in the 12 steps and be of service. For me, being of service is everything. And step 7, the humility to realize that I am one of God's kids, and my job here, like I said, why am I here? What is the role assigned? It talks about in our literature. Can I accept the role assigned? What is my role assigned? My role assigned today, my number one priority is to stay sober and help another alcoholic achieve sobriety. So whenever there's an opportunity or a role for me to partake in, as in being of service to another drunk or a drug addict, that's my job, and I get to go do that. And when I go do that, it's amazing how powerful I feel. And all of a sudden, I'm able to quit smoking. All of a sudden, I'm able to start exercising. All of a sudden, I'm able to do all these things that I could never get around to doing. And it's just beyond belief. I mean, and I've been, like I said, I've been sober 33 years last March. And that may not impress you, but it impresses the hell out of my family. And they're more than willing to vouch for Alcoholics Anonymous, because it's the best thing going. But like I said, to me, the 12 steps are a transmission. To single out one step is almost doing a disservice, in my opinion. But the power of 12 step is based in humility. Am I willing to humble my story? Like I could tell you the story about, I grew up with all this violence where my father, used to do all this stuff and, physical attack. And I don't know about you, but I took all that personally. I thought that determined who I was and meant that I was a bad person. Uh, so in inventory, I got to take a look at, like they say, how do you participate in that, right? How do I participate in my relationship with my father? And and through the examples that were set for me in the program, I was willing to do that. And I looked at it, and I was just a young man that loved his father and trusted his father and did that. And underneath that, I found out what the real problem was. See, I thought the problem with my father was the hatred and the anger and the resentment I had towards him. But what that was just a wall hiding the truth from me, not from you, but from me. And the truth that was behind that wall that I was desperately hiding with all my might was the fact that I loved my father, and I felt shame that I loved someone that treated me the way he treated me. And I didn't know what to do with it. So the only thing I know how to do with stuff is to get angry or to put up a wall. If you're gonna challenge me with one of your character defects, I'm gonna raise you, raise you one bigger, And I actually don't have to do that today. I do. I slip every now and then. But, to take a look at that, to humble the story that my father was this monster and was all that stuff, afforded me the ability and the open mind to listen to maybe it wasn't the way I saw it. And don't you know, I was sponsoring a guy that I didn't want to sponsor, right? A guy from Jersey. I was out in Seattle, and I just didn't like this guy. He asked me to sponsor him. I didn't want to sponsor him. He's like, and of course I said yes, though. So I was giving him stuff to do that I had not done. I was just trying to get rid of the guy because there was just something about him I didn't like. And he would go out and do these service positions and all this stuff, and would come back gleefully looking for more. I couldn't get rid of the guy. So finally, we got to the 4th and the 5th step, and we set up on Green Lake up there in Seattle, and beautiful summer night. We sat there, and he read me his 5th step. And it was like my father sitting there asking me for forgiveness. And, you can't get there from therapy, from all that other stuff. I mean, it was a God shot. I mean, my heart was cleansed. My relationship with my father was complete. And I realized then that it was all, I was enabled In helping others see through their condition, I get to see through my own condition. That just seems to be the way it is. That when, I can't see my soul, I can't see my heart, but when I look into your eyes and you demonstrate to me, somehow it mirrors back mine. And it's so powerful. And once you experience it, you'll never turn back, or you might, but you'll never be able to deny that there's a power out there. And that has been my experience. And don't you know, the next guy that I did a fifth step with was talking about his father was violent and beat him and all this stuff. He goes, but don't you know that my father had a head injury, and people with head injuries are prone to violence? And I had never heard that in all my life, honest to God, or maybe I heard it and just didn't recognize it. And all of a sudden I realized that my father had had an industrial accident when I was like 3 years old, and before I even was conscious of being myself, really. And he was prone to violence, and he had alcoholism, right? So it wasn't even about me. And there goes my story about me being this rotten kid, this deformed person that my father had to beat up and do all this other stuff. Imagine, like we like to say, bravely, but it's a whole nother challenge to actually walk that path, is to say, who am I without my story? And that's where the seventh step is so powerful, where I humble my story. And I take that definition, the context of how AA and the 12 steps say it, a clear idea of who and what I really am. I'm not this deformed kid that my father hated and beat up at all. You know what I mean? I am a child of God, and I get to give of the gifts that I was given, because all of us make it. It's just like, if you have a problem with God, one of the places I started, another place I started was, like that saying, God in me, as me, is me, but I'm not God. I couldn't comprehend that one, but I could comprehend the human race in me, as me, is me, but I'm not the human race, because the human race is all of us. Life in me, as me, is me, but I am not life, because life is everything. And when I humble in 6, I humble my story and all that, and ask in 7, my creator, to have the good and the bad, the story, the resentment, everything, take that. Then I really get to be free. And here's the funny thing about that I discovered, is that I don't know how to be free. I've never lived free of my story. I never lived free of all this stuff. So now I feel lost and out of place. I feel like the square peg in a round hole. So now, at 20 years of sobriety, when that was going on, I needed meetings more than ever. And I felt like I was falling apart. But like we say around here, it's crazy how sometimes things need to fall apart in order for them to fall back together again. And today, I have challenges just like the rest of us. And of course, we know all that's going on in the world today, or isn't going on, right? And I'm at peace with myself. My relationship with myself is over. And that doesn't mean my life is over. That means that I'm not in a debate about who I am anymore. There's an interesting saying that we use, that, God either is or he isn't, right? Love either is or it isn't, right? We get to ask ourselves that. And at some point, the more you go down that point, in my opinion, you come to the choice of, I get to turn that over as well. It's no longer me deciding moment to moment. I get to turn over, like they say, God gave us life. God gave us free will. I've always liked the saying that, God's first gift to us was our life. And our best gift to God is to give our life back to him. And see, when I always heard that, because I was imprinted with that early religion and stuff, I resisted at first, but I get to remind myself, no, it's not about that. It's about spirituality, right? And spirituality, the correct context that I'm speaking of, I don't know what your context is, but the context I'm using is the one in our literature. And it says a spiritual awakening, a personality change sufficient to recover from a hopeless state of mind and body. So has my personality changed? And if so, how has it changed? And if not, why hasn't it changed? And what am I holding on to? What in me resists the freedom and the joy and the abundance that life is? And that's where 7 is so powerful, because one more time, I get to humble it in 6. And in 7, ask God to come in between me in my belief in lacking and scarcity, and all that other stuff. And that I'm limited. It says in our literature that we must allow for limitless expansion. It's an infinite God, and we get to tap into that. And one more time, like the speaker before me was so eloquent saying, we get to access that. How do we get to access that? I want to know. I need to know as a sober member of Alcoholics Anonymous, because if I don't know, I'm probably going to drink, and I don't ever want to drink again. And that access is come to make a decision, look at my part in it, promptly admit it, share it with another person, present whatever the problem or the challenge is, quit telling, like I say, God, how powerful it is, ask God to help me with it, and then it goes into, I'm not going to go into the other stuff because we have speakers coming on that stuff, but it's so powerful. And then I start living a life that's disconnected from my story. And like I said, I don't know how to live without my story. Who am I beyond my story? I wouldn't know. And I get to go on that journey of discovery. And it's just crazy. It's like, I'll give the example of, I was married and of course I spent my whole life using women. And I don't like to admit this, but it's the truth. I grew up with a lot of violence, and my father beat my mother stuff. And I always hated the fact of any man hitting a woman or anything like that. And I never hit a woman, right? So I always held that as a thing of pride. But I've worked with enough people over the years, and I'm sure most of the people in this meeting have. You could ask every single person on the planet, if you had a choice between physical abuse and emotional abuse, which would you pick? And every single person that I've ever asked said, oh, I would take the physical beating over the emotional beating any day of the week. So I was priding myself wrongly that I had never hit a woman and had never abused a woman, but I had emotionally abused them because, see, I was using them because I felt like I needed a woman. The woman's missing, even no matter how many you got, right? To validate me and to make me feel good about myself, because I'm God in my life telling myself that I'm missing and there's something lacking about me. So therefore I need a woman. So it's a closed circle, right? There's no hope. There's no stuff. So I have to go out in the world and seek validation and seek I'm God playing that I know what's wrong with me. And then I'm God saying, I know what is going to fix me, a woman. So I went out there and used women like that. And, I never, like I said, I never thought that I abused women until we got divorced and we went through the stuff. And it was a really, really hard time because we had a son involved in that, and she took off with her son. And it's just my side of the story. I'm not going to go into it. But so my sponsor said to me, and this is the kind of sponsorship I've had and I've been so lucky to have. I referred to her as my ex-wife one time in front of me. He says, she is not an ex anything to God, and you will not refer to her as your ex-wife ever again. And I have not. And I thought that was unfair at first. And he goes, as a matter of fact, you're going to look at your participation in that relationship, and water seeks its own level, and who you're in a relationship with says as much about you as you do about them. Those are the truths that we must face or get to face around here, the harsh truths of water seeking its own level. So I got to look at that. Why did I get in a relationship with this woman? How is it that I got into it? And I was able to look at those things where I felt like I was lacking and needed a woman. And I didn't just need a woman. I needed like this trophy wife and all this other stuff. And when I got to look at that, I found out why was that. What was below that was because I thought I was unlovable and all like stuff like we go over. And I found out that I was living as a coward. And I don't like to think of myself as a coward. I got to look at that stuff and then find out that I was not living as myself. I was afraid to live my life from my heart. And I really believe that the whole program is about learning to live from your heart, which is the actual definition, in my opinion, of spirituality. Spirit goes back to courage, which courage goes back to meaning heart. We get to live from our heart today, not our mind-generated life, our thinking life. We get to stop and pause. And instead of selecting the old ideas of anger and those old tools, we get to select from the principles, from the stuff that actually works, the stuff that's productive. A lot of those other old ideas are well-worn paths. So my compass kind of wants to go that way originally, but I get to pause, call someone, talk to them, and start, doing something different rather than I've always done. And in looking in that, I realized that I spent my life thinking my heart was like a container, and it was like a little tin cup. I had to go out and get you guys to give me enough love so I could feel good about me, right? This has all come from this crazy inventory over my son's mom, right? And I spent my whole life that way. And I just thought, it shouldn't be that way. Would God have designed your heart to be like a cup where you have to go out and ask people for love and you never know how much is enough? Or is my higher power the type that the heart is a dispenser, and the more I give of it, the more that is there? And that has proven to be true. Now today, it's like the woman's not missing in my life anymore, and that's a complete adjustment as well. To live your life like the best and most amazing relationship you've ever had in with your life is on its way, and you better get yourself ready. You better get yourself prepared, because the most amazing path lies ahead. And that is what the 12 steps affords us. And that is what practicing humility and humbling my thoughts, my beliefs in how I think it is, and what I know. And I've got the evidence. I could point to stories growing up to prove that I should think this way, but I would rather the freedom. And that's one of the most amazing things that we get to experience around this program, is we get to experience freedom, not just from drugs and alcohol, not just from financial insecurity. Those things are just the window dressing. What we really get to do is get to be free from ourself, free from our self-loathing, free from all that stuff, our own limited thinking. It goes on and on. I mean, it is amazing what the 12 steps has done in my life, and where it goes. I have no idea how much time I have left. Can someone cue me how much time I have left? Okay, good. I'm glad it's wrapping up. So that is it. And I really believe, like I said, use the 12 steps used as a transmission is so powerful. But to speak about them individually, like the step 7, really does separate the men from the boys. If you have a problem, and women from the girls, right? So if you have a problem, can you surrender it? Can you humble it and surrender to your higher power that you say is powerful enough? And I didn't select the higher power. And that's what I'm saying. Admit that I'm powerless. I cannot change this thing. My management of my health is the problem. My health isn't the problem. My managing my health is the problem. Is there a power greater than myself that can help me with this? Yes, I believe that there is. 3, I make a decision to turn that over. And 4, I inventory how I'm participating in this unhealthy lifestyle. And 5, I share it with someone. And then 6, I humble it by saying, this stuff doesn't have the power, and I turn it over in 7. And it's just so powerful. So I think that's enough for me. And if anybody has any questions, I'd be more than happy to answer them. And thanks for letting me share.
Thank you so much, Patrick.
Thanks.
Thank you, Patrick.
Thank you, Patrick.
Thank you, Patrick.
Thank you, Patrick.
Absolutely awesome. Humble heart, transparency.
May I ask if there's a home group in the Denver area that you could share the link, the Zoom link?
Most of them, Denver's pretty locked down still. There's only 2 or 3 meetings that are actually meeting live. I've gone to the Saturday morning promises meeting for 20 years. I started a big speaker meeting 3rd Saturday of the month, the Fifth Tradition Group, which is a great meeting. And then, of course, there's York Street, which is the oldest AA clubhouse west of the Mississippi, which was established in like 1948, and they had their first meetings in 1949.